Although Formula 1 remains one of the most popular sports to watch, there have been less than 800 people to ever race in F1. Less than 100 people have ever won in a race. The Marlboro advertising on Ferrari cars in the early 2000s probably remains one of the most iconic sponsorships in F1 history. The way how this advertising works, however, is one of the most bizarre things I've ever met in Formula 1. At some point, for example, Ferrari had to replace their Marlboro logo with a barcode, due to the ban on cigarette advertising. The meaning behind the barcode logo was that when following the car at high speeds, the motion blur effect would reassemble the Marlboro logo. Although Formula 1 is an international sport, it has been mostly dominated by European drivers throughout the ages. The 1990 Japanese Grand Prix, for instance, is the last time when no European drivers were on the podium. Wheel guns are pneumatic tools used to screw and unscrew the nuts that attach wheels to the car. The basic concept is the same as that used in any road car garage, but the guns used in F1 are technology of a higher order, with a high flow rate spinning the guns at more than 10,000 RPM. The F1 wheel guns are probably the loudest things you can hear in the pits, even louder than the engines. They actually require some amount of skills before start being used, otherwise they can pretty easily cause hand injuries. It actually takes more time for an F1 car to reach 100 km per hour than later reach 200. It takes about 2.4 seconds for a 2016 F1 car to reach 100 and only around 1.8 seconds to reach 200. This can be simply justified by the fact that the traction loss at the moment when the car starts accelerating is the highest and decreases as the car gains more speed. It is not allowed to finish a race by crossing the finish line in the pit lane. This is forbidden for two reasons. First, on some tracks, the path to the point of the finishing line is shorter through the pit lane than it is on track, meaning the driver would actually be shortening his race. Second, some grid spots are located before the finishing line and some are positioned after the line. Allowing a team to finish the race in the pit lane would enable teams whose grid spot is located before the line to conduct their mandatory pit stop on their actual last lap, while teams whose grid spot is located after the line cannot do this. Since the rules should not actively create an advantage or disadvantage for any team, finishing a race in the pit lane is generally not allowed in Formula 1. The rules were changed after the 1998 British Grand Prix, when Michael Schumacher finished the race in the pit lane as he needed to serve his 10-second penalty. Pastor Maldonado holds the record for the highest number of received penalties during a race. During the 2015 Hungarian Grand Prix, Maldonado was penalized 3 times in total: for causing a collision with Sergio Perez, for speeding in a pit lane, and for overtaking behind a safety car. The Venezuelan driver also holds the record for the highest number of penalties received during one season. In 2015, he was penalized 10 times. Although nowadays we are used to having one tire manufacturer supplying tires for every single F1 team, things used to be slightly different in the past. The 2006 season was the last one when there were 2 manufacturers, Michelin and Bridgestone. The highest diversity of companies supplying tires was, however, in the 50s. In the 1958 season, for example, there were 6 of them: Dunlop, Engelbert, Continental, Firestone, Pirelli and Avon. The 1996 Monaco GP holds the record for the race with the most retirements and fewest finishers in a race. There have been only 3 out of 22 drivers who were able to finish. The race was held in really wet conditions and it was won by Olivier Panis. Although Max Verstappen is widely considered the most successful Dutch driver ever, not that many people know that he is actually born in Belgium. Although Verstappen has a Belgian mother, he decided to compete with a Dutch racing license because he feels more Dutch, spent more time with his father than with his mother owing to his cutting activities, and was always surrounded by Dutch people while growing in Maaseik, a Belgian town at the Dutch border. The 2011 Hungarian Grand Prix is the race that holds the record for the most pit stops during a race, 88. The need for replacing the tires so often was justified by the changing weather conditions during the Sunday race. The safety regulations and requirements were pretty insignificant in the early ages of the sport. The first time when a safety car was ever used during an F1 race was the 1973 Canadian Grand Prix, where a yellow Porsche 914 was called for duty during various incidents under bad weather conditions. Controversially, on that occasion, it took several hours after the race to figure out the winner and final results, since the safety car driver had placed his car in front of the wrong competitor, causing part of the field to be 1 lap down incorrectly. The first ever start under a safety car, on the other hand, was during the 1997 Belgian Grand Prix. It is also worth mentioning that Aston Martin Vantage, introduced as a safety car in 2021, is the first non-Mercedes safety car since 1996. The Pirelli Blue tires are the full wet rubber that is most effective for heavy rain. These tires can evacuate 85 liters of water per second at 300 km per hour. In 1993, Williams was testing a slightly modified version of their F1 car that had a CVT transmission instead of a regular one. A continuously variable transmission, or CVT, is a belt transmission that can change steplessly for an infinite number of effective gear ratios between maximum and minimum values. Because a CVT transmission does not have a fixed number of gears, it has a huge advantage of maintaining the most ideal RPMs for any given engine speed. The 1993 Williams car with this gearbox installed was at least several seconds quicker than the normal 1993 car, which later led to the FIA declaring that from next year the cars had to have a fixed number of gears. As a result, the car was never actually raced and eventually found its way to the museum.
David Coulthard will not do any gear changing. The electronics do all the work for him.
It was during the 1997 European Grand Prix when for the first and the only time in history, 3 different drivers have set identical times during qualifying. During the 1-hour Saturday qualifying session, Jacques Villeneuve, Michael Schumacher and Heinz-Harald Frentzen set identical lap times of 1 minute, 21 seconds and 72 thousandths. Jacques Villeneuve, however, was the one who started from the pole position, as he was the first to set the lap time. Ernst Löw was a German driver who holds the undesirable record for the driver with the shortest Formula 1 career. He has participated in 1 race only, however, was forced to retire after a fuel pump failure in his car. He managed to drive a distance of just 2 meters. Some drivers are very superstitious. They have certain rituals that they do before each race. David Coulthard, for example, used to wear his old lucky underwear during races. Sebastian Vettel, on the other hand, keeps 2 coins in socks over a race weekend, one of which his grandmother gave him. Tire heaters are probably one of the most essential things for every single Formula 1 team nowadays. Formula 1 tires are heated because warm rubber performs better and sticks to the track more than cold rubber. F1 tires are designed to perform at around 100 degrees Celsius, and therefore the tires need to be heated to this temperature to be effective on the track. Once a race is finished, an F1 car tire will theoretically still be hot enough to cook an egg. The 4-time F1 world champion Sebastian Vettel has an interesting habit of naming his car for each Formula 1 season. He mostly gives female names to his race cars, and he does that to feel more attached to them. His last car, AMR 21 for example, is named Honey Rider. Vettel gave her this name after the first Bond girl from the original James Bond film, Dr. No, from 1962. Victor L. Pease was a British-Canadian driver who earned the undesirable achievement for being the only competitor disqualifying from a World Championship race, the 1969 Canadian Grand Prix, for being too slow. At the time, he had completed 22 laps in an uncompetitive car, while the leaders have finished 46. His Formula 1 career was limited to 3 Canadian Grand Prix, consisting of a non-classification, a failure to start, and a disqualification. The youngest driver who has ever taken part in an F1 race is Max Verstappen. He was only 17 years, 166 days old, when starting in his first ever 2015 Australian Grand Prix for Scuderia Toro Rosso. The oldest driver, on the other hand, to ever race an F1 Grand Prix was Louis Chiron. He finished 6th in the 1955 Monaco Grand Prix when he was 55. He also took practice for the 1958 Monaco GP at the age of 58 years old. The Bugatti Chiron, by the way, takes its name from him. Although people of any gender are allowed to participate in the Formula 1 Championship, the sport was generally dominated by men. 5 women racing drivers have entered at least 1 Grand Prix, although only 2 of them ever qualified and started a race. The woman who competed in the most Grand Prix is Lella Lombardi, with 17 entries and 12 starts. She also remains the only female F1 driver to ever score points in F1. When an F1 car stops for its pit stop, it usually stands not fully parallel to the pit lane. It is usually more complicated and generally slower for the drivers to stop at a perfect angle, so the teams apply the markings for where their drivers need to stop at an angle which is some degrees towards the pit garage. This small detail is unfortunately ignored in all recent official F1 games, where cars seem to enter the pits as if they would be driven by robots. As in other sports, Formula 1 drivers are subject to random drug tests. However, the frequency of these tests has significantly reduced these days, mainly because racing drivers don't dope at all. There has never really ever been a culture of doping in motor racing. Thanks for watching.